everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's good to see you all. My name is Danielle, and I'm the CEO of Women Talk Design, and I welcome you to our speaker stories today with Ariba, Jahan. We are really excited for today's conversation and wanted to share a few things before we get started. We do have live automated captioning, so if you want to follow along, I'm going to drop that link in the chat right now. You can also see it at the top of your screen. It'll say live streaming with Otter. That's our captioning. It's imperfect, but something you can use to follow along. And I want to give you a kind of quick introduction to Women Talk Design and our session today. So at Women Talk Design, we are on a larger mission to help see a more diverse group of speakers on stage. And we really believe that we need to hear the voice of more women and non-binary folks. And so do a couple of different things to support that. We have a speaker directory on our website. We have over 600 speakers from around the world talking on topics within design and tech at large. It's kind of a broad category. We also work with event organizers on how they can design more inclusive events that our speakers want to be a part of. And then finally, we do events and trainings and just offer different opportunities for our community to get inspired to start speaking, have the tools and confidence to continue doing so, and give them opportunities to practice. And so our speaker series is a new one that we started about a month ago, and we have a couple different goals with it. One is that we really wanted to be able to highlight different folks in our community that are speaking at all, kind of from all different backgrounds, all different perspectives, all different areas within their speaker journey, and give you all the opportunity to learn from them and ask questions about how they got started speaking, how they think of their talk topics, how they find opportunities. And we also really wanted to give folks in our community the chance to connect. And so the outline of this is going to be, I have some questions to get us started to hear a little bit about Ariba's story and journey to public speaking. And then I'm going to open it up and give a lot of time for y'all to ask questions. I think it's really important. You joined here for a reason, and you have something that you might be curious about. And so I encourage you to start thinking about what those questions are, and we'll ask them about halfway through. And then finally, I really hope that you'll stick around the last 15 minutes. That's when we go into breakout rooms. And we found that to be a really positive experience from folks that have been joining these calls. We'll have some prompts that you can use to chat with one another, but it gives you a chance to meet someone else in the community, to share where you are in your speaking journey. If there was something today that resonated, where you can use support, where you might be able to offer support. So we hope you'll stick around for that. So that's kind of our outline today. And I'm really, really thrilled to get started and introduce you all to Ariba. So Ariba Jahan is the Director of Innovation at the Ad Council, where she's established the organization's innovation practice. Her current projects include scaling equitable design practices across the org, leading design sprints, creating digital products for social impact, exploring a future-forward technology, and nurturing a culture that fosters equity and innovation. As a member of the DEI Council, she also leads efforts to advance equality and inclusion at the organization. As an immigrant Bengali woman who discovered her profound hearing loss at the age of 8, Ariba advocates for diverse, marginalized voices that are often overlooked to ensure we bring equity into tech. She designs an inclusive and equitable human-centered products and experiences by developing teams built on curiosity, resiliency, and experimentation. Ariba is an international speaker and has spoken at events across the US, UK, Japan, and Chile. She also volunteers to teach UX design to marginalized high school students in NYC. So please join me in welcoming Ariba.
Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here. Danielle, thank you so much for having me here today.
Awesome. Great. Well, we are so thrilled to have you here, Ariba. And, as I mentioned, I'd love for us to just learn a bit more about your story and your path to speaking. So if you want to get started, maybe you can share why is it that you started speaking and how you got that first speaking engagement.
Sure. I feel like at some point, many of us start thinking about like, oh, speaking or blogging or some sort of a thought leadership thing is something we should do to kind of get ourselves out there. And I think originally I didn't really have more of a reason than that. So then I would join webinars or seminars to learn about how people started speaking and But without that first initial purpose, I never really acted on it. My first example of that would be I went to Global CFP Day. I don't know if you guys know about Global CFP Day, but it's a great event that happens across the globe, um, where individuals are invited to come learn about call for proposals, how to put a proposal together, and how to start doing talks. Exactly, right there. So I went there, and it was the first time I got to even learn about, oh, I was wondering if he was there. I saw Peter here. Hi, Peter. Um, and uh, so I learned about like how to come up with a talk idea, how to create talks, and how to like find CFPs. But at the moment, I didn't really know why I wanted to speak or what I wanted to speak about. So I kind of like tabled that knowledge and sat on it and was like, I want to make sure that when I do this, I'm doing it for a reason that makes sense. And so then I kind of kept reading about other people's speaker journeys. Women Talk Design became a really great resource to learn about other speakers, as well as just like keep up with the dialogues in the Facebook group to see like what people were doing. Um, and I think in 2019, what year are we in? Yeah, 2019, what ended up happening was there was a moment where I was like, you know, I had my why. I had my why in two different ways. One, for my internal reason, was I wanted to put myself out there more and to see, do I even enjoy speaking versus like setting a goal of speaking and realizing I don't like it. And I started realizing that being someone who is an innovation and product and digital space, I don't see a lot of women or non-binary individuals or individuals of color on stage. And I wanted to start thinking about how can I be more of an added voice in that dialogue versus just noticing that it's missing. And in terms of my own like career growth, I wanted to kind of invest back to myself and think about like, could it be that the things I'm learning are valuable enough to share with others? And at that moment, it was more like a question. I didn't really feel like I had something to share yet. So in 2019, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna find a way to speak at a thing, regardless of what it is, whether it's a podcast or a meetup or on stage. So I started Googling like CFP, and I don't know if any of you have ever Googled CFP. First thing you realize is like there's also an acronym for CFP in accounting. That is not what this is. So it took me a long time to get the jargon of like CFP proposals, abstracts, and all of that. And I did just a lot of learning through reading blog articles, being on Slack channels where people were talking about speaking, Women Talk Design, Global CFP Day, and Shine Bootcamp. So at some point, I put together an abstract, and then I had no idea whether it was good. So thank goodness for Slack channels, because I literally just like went into a Slack community called Women in Tech, and it was just the most incredibly supportive group of individuals that were willing to read my abstract, give feedback. And that's kind of how it all started. And then I applied, and then I went from, and I was shocked the first time I got into a conference. And in 2019, I spoke at, yeah, I think since I started applying, I spoke at 13 events. I'll pause there. I don't know if there are
Awesome.
other,
No, that's
okay.
great. That was, I really appreciate the way that you thought about like, what is my purpose for wanting to speak? I know that that's something that a lot of the times folks will dive in and not think about why do I want to do this? And then it's hard to think about, well, what do I want to talk about? And when things get hard, like, you know, maybe it's easy to give up because I didn't have a purpose for wanting to do this to begin with. So I really appreciate you sharing how you approach that. I'd love to hear, what is the topic that you came up with? So when you started to reflect on, you know, now that I know that why I want to speak and starting to apply, what was that topic?
Oh yeah. So my process for even like getting to a topic was like I did a brain dump of all the topics that I'm passionate about or energized by, and then projects that I've worked on that I felt like it stayed with me, whether it was lessons that stayed with me or the project impact that stayed with me. And I ended up, my first talk was actually, Peter actually added it to the chat. It was around the fact that empathy is not enough. I think like in design, we talk a lot about empathy, and my perspective was that you can't empathize your way to understanding a lived experience of someone else, versus like, could we challenge our own biases and make sure that we're just designing with the people instead of for the people. Um, and I think that really hit on my own why, because you know, in my bio you mentioned I am someone who identifies as someone with a hard of hearing, and as a woman of color and an immigrant. But it also took me a long time to like own that identity. My first version of the talk, I never even mentioned it, which is probably the version Peter linked, versus my most recent version of that talk. I'm much more open about why equitable design matters so much to me. And I think that's a journey we'll all have, like when that makes sense. Some people start with being able to integrate their own story right within their talk. I wasn't. I actually remember JS conference was my first talk, and Peter was there. And it was kind of hilarious to meet the person who started the organization which was the organization that gave me my first introduction to what like a CFP was. And I remember us sitting around a couch, and I think I like told him what my origin story is and my why. And I think it was Peter and someone else that were like, why isn't that part of your talk? And I was like, I don't know, you know, I'm not so comfortable about saying that on stage, you know. And look at me now, that's part of my bio, right? So I think like there's a lot of parallel journeys you will go through as your talk evolves. So do we. So do we, in terms of our own comfort with who we are, as well as like how we want to vocalize who we are and what we want to represent, and how that ends up getting embedded into the work that we do.
Great. I love hearing that evolution of, even, it sounds like it was the same top topic that you were giving and you just continued to evolve it. Can
Yeah.
you share a little bit about that process of maybe how you prepared for that first talk, and as you continued to give the same talk that it sounds like had some changes with it, how you continued to approach that preparation process?
So I'm a over preparer. Like I'm one of those people where I can't like do a power pose and confidence comes. None of those hacks have ever worked for me. I tried it. I'm someone who, if I over prepare, then I'm going to feel comfortable, even if I don't end up using all the things that I've over prepared on. So I had many versions of the deck before I even had my final version. So my advice would be, figure out what works for you, what makes you feel comfortable and confident, and do that thing. Your mileage may vary. For me, I needed to write a full script and then tweak that script. I needed to have all types of research done, and then realize that I didn't need that much external research, but lean more on the experience from my project. But you need to go through that experience and journey on your own to figure out like, what is that fine balance for you. So I had a mixture of a ton of just like pen and paper notes, as well as Google Docs where I was dumping research, as well as another Google Doc where I had my script. Then I had like one or two versions of a deck in the beginning. And then for my first talk, I literally had my script in so many different places. It was in my notes app, it was in my slides, it was in, it was printed in a piece of paper. You know, like I had to do all the things to feel like if all fails, I'll be okay. And literally during my first talk, the screen went out. And it was like, oh, okay, well. And I think it's one of those things where I chuckled a bit to myself, and then the screen came back on and it was fine, right? But I think for me, I needed that level of over preparation to be like, well, if I could just lean on the notes that I have on my phone if the slides don't come back on. The other thing, so in terms of tweaking the slides, what I do is even as I'm talking, even as I'm presenting, I'll notice where I'm kind of gravitating more, or like when people come to me and talk to me at the end of the talk, what questions are they asking? What resonated with them? And not all conferences gather feedback. So I think like you'll have to kind of do that on your own. It's great when people say your talk was great and you're like, okay, what about it was great? So probe a little to get some of that. And if a conference does gather feedback, ask for it, grab it and use it. And I think like as Peter and many other individuals kind of pushed me to explore how to integrate my own story, I became more and more comfortable with where that story fits. And then at a more recent conference at Confab, I mean, Confab is all about like the story and content. So so a lot of conferences will also offer like mentoring or like advice giving. And I always volunteer for that. I'm like, yes, give it to me. So I can understand at different conferences, like how do you make sure that you're always tailoring your content and your story so it meets the audience's needs for that theme or for that event. And Christina, who's one of the founders of Confab, she helped me shape where that story actually fits and what portion of the story actually makes sense. So I went from never wanting to talk about my story to lumping it into one section as like a mic drop, and then moving on to the content of the talk, to then really infusing it in a way that made sense at a moment that made sense. So I think like you always have to look at your story as well as your talk as an iterative process. So from every event, it'll change. But what's happening in parallel to you speaking is that you're living and you're working and you're experiencing. So a lot of your work experiences or your project experiences may also evolve your talk.
I love that. I love hearing about the iterative process and how you got from, giving this initial version of your talk to really infusing your story into it. That's great. I'd love to hear if you can share a bit more about how you went about choosing the conferences that you applied to or ended up speaking at. I know you mentioned you did some Googling and had these kind of different resources, but as you even started to see which conferences you might speak at, how did you make that decision of, I want to apply here? Or, if anyone reached out and asked you to speak, how you decided to say yes versus no to opportunities?
In the beginning, it was literally if there was a conference that looked like they had a good code of conduct and they had a good reputation in terms of how they treated their communities, and they were open to UX or design talks. Those were my criterias in the beginning, right? And those criterias are still there. I want to make sure the community is strong and people feel great being part of that event. And I also look at the makeup of their past talks. Like, are they hosting a lot of panels, or is there diversity, or are they only doing diversity when it's a talk about diversity, or are they making sure that there is diversity and equity through everything that they do? Are they paying attention to accessibility? So I think all those types of things matter. And I think, so that's like the vetting. And then there's like making sure that your talk matches the event. So the way I searched for it was, I think there's places like Tech Daily, CFP, there's CFP Land, there's Women Talk Design. I think if you've ever attended a global CFP day, they have their own Slack channels, and they'll also share talk opportunities. And pretty much so many any community these days that's an intersection of like design or technology, there is a channel somewhere on their Slack space around like speaking, right? UX Hexagon is another one. I can also like send all the Slack channels, Slack communities I'm part of. But so I like sift through them. Shine Bootcamp is another one. And in the beginning, it was more like whatever I found, and if I could apply to it, I would just apply. And then I started, now it's a matter of like, where does my message need to be? Who am I trying to So when you have a talk, you should think about like, what is the thing that you want people to leave with? What do you want people to do immediately after they've attended your talk? And then I have to think about like, where do I want that action to happen? So now I'm being a little bit more intentional. Not that I wasn't intentional at all, but it's more like, you kind of go through your rounds of experience, and as you become experienced, what spaces you want to be in. I'm not tied to speaking at only design related events. I think being cross-functional, having cross-functional knowledge as well as cross-pollination is really critical. I come from biomechanical engineering. I never thought I would be in here, so I'm not tied to any like one theme. Is that helpful? I don't remember if
Yeah,
that
that's
was.
great. As
Okay,
you were chatting, I was researching the different things to put it in the chat
awesome.
for the resources. I'll also follow up with an email to everyone and link to some of those resources that Ariba shared. So that was great. I really encourage you all, we want to hear from you. So please start thinking of your questions. We'll ask that
Yeah.
you'll put it in the chat, and then I'll invite you if you want to share it live and ask Ariba, but if not, I can read it for you. But getting that in the chat to start off with would be great. So I have another question in the meantime, but start thinking of your questions. Ariba, I'd love to hear about where you are now with your speaking. I know that this is something that we've recently been in touch with of how you're thinking about what's next. And I'd love if you can share a little bit about that process of, you did all of these speaking engagements last year, and now, it's a new year, it's a pandemic. And
Yeah.
so how are you thinking about, if you want to continue speaking, what you want to speak about and how you'll approach that?
So during last year, so between last January to like maybe this, I don't even remember, maybe this April is when I did like 13 to 14 events. And that includes doing panels, doing other talks in addition to the one I talked about around empathy. And I think what ended up happening was like, maybe it was like the 8th time I was doing the same talk. I was bored. I was like, I need a different topic, not different topic, but like maybe a different talk. And that was really great for me to feel, because that means I'm at a level of comfort with that one talk that I'm like, I need something else. And by then I had started doing panels as well, which was really new for me. I did a panel on women in design leadership. I facilitated a panel on women in STEM at CES. And so I noticed that I started becoming more comfortable and more articulate. So I felt like those two combination, the boredom plus like me being more comfortable speaking, were great signals to me that I was ready to like maybe leave the comfort of my first two talks, and like try new ideas. But I wanted to make sure I was approaching it again intentionally. So I created a Google Doc, and by now I already knew the power of the community. It's the community that has always evolved my abstract, so gave me really honest feedback on like what felt clear or not clear, or like someone would read an abstract and be able to tell me like, you should totally apply to this conference, and it would be an event that I would never even know about. So what I did was like, I created a Google Doc where on the top it's like, why do I want to speak, like why do I even want to do this, even if it's after doing conference speaking last year is not enough of a reason, right? Like if I've done it, that's done. Why am I going to continue? So I created a list of all my whys. And then I made a list of like, what type of feedback am I looking for on these abstracts? And then the rest of the Google Doc is like a bunch of abstracts. So like each one might have like a talk number 1, and then title options I'm looking at. I am not the best at titles, so it's good to brain dump a few and hope that someone is more snazzy than me and they can come up with a better talk title. And then just abstracts. And sometimes an abstract, I may have multiple versions of it because some applications may have character limitations. So you want to make sure you're able to distill it down to a smaller version when necessary. So right now I'm actually looking at my Google Doc right now. It's labeled Ariba's Talk Ideas 2020. And there's like 4 talks in it. And then at the bottom of it, I have like 2 versions of my own bio, where I'm hoping people kind of give me nudges on like which bio resonates. I don't know about you guys, but like writing a bio for myself and trying to make myself sound um, uh, as if I would be a good speaker for the lineup, but also like I'm not great at like positioning myself. So it's good to have a few versions and get gut reactions. So that's kind of like where like it becomes my working doc. And then I think about like where do I want feedback from and who do I want feedback from. So the same communities I mentioned earlier, I may reach out and say, hi, I am putting together some talk abstracts. Would love it if someone, if there were anyone who would be open to looking at it and providing feedback, right? And then some people might raise their hand, and in that case, I would share the Google link with them. And so then what ends up happening is like, you give them the instruction manual, right? They understand why you want to talk. So they already understand your why, and they kind of have a lens of like who this human is that's beyond that Google Doc. And then by having that section around like what feedback I'm looking for, I'm helping them help me. And then the Google Doc becomes like a great place to start. So that's kind of where I am right now. I have 4 talks that I wrote up, 4 abstracts I wrote up. I only applied to 1 event so far. I applied to Design Ops, and I will be speaking at Design Ops on a topic I've never spoken about, but oh, I should have mentioned this. So as I was coming up with my talk ideas, what I did was I wanted to have a diverse range of maybe a talk subject that leans more on my pre-existing talk subject. So if my last talk was about creating digital products, but using specific design methodologies that made it more equitable, I may have something similar to that where it's a different project altogether, different methodology, but like, you know, a digital product, some methodology that I want to get people to do more of in their projects. And then I wanted to have some talks around leadership, as well as like how to cultivate teams. And that was something new for me in terms of speaking, but something I always wanted to talk about. As well as another talk subject where it was all about like anti-racism, you know, as someone who is in the DEI Council, as well as someone who works, who identifies as a woman of color, as a non-Black POC, it's kind of like, what can I do to help advance our industry to becoming more anti-racist? So having a variety was really important for me, to think about like, how do I talk about things from my own experience, and my own lived experience, as well as my own work experience, but might be new for me or challenging the status quo in a new way that I haven't done before.
That's great. Thank you for sharing how you're thinking about that. And I actually had someone message me and ask that they said the doc sounds really interesting and they want to know if you'd be open to sharing it. So it's up to you whether or not you'd be open to sharing it with the group, or if you want people to reach out to you individually if you don't want to share it to the whole group. But
Yeah, reach out to me.
yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. All right. We'll share some ways to get in touch with Ariba after the session. All right, y'all, we want to make sure we can hear your questions. What questions do you have for Ariba?
Yeah, and I'm new to all of this, you know, just because I spoke at some events doesn't mean I've like become a pro at coming up with talk ideas. It was the most frustrating thing. I was like, I want to talk. I don't know how to do this again. So I think it's just a muscle, and I think we're all learning and growing. So there's no wrong question to ask.
Love that. All right, y'all. Well, while you're thinking of your questions, and like I said, I encourage you to put it in the chat so then you don't have to worry about the right moment to unmute. I'd love to hear, everybody. You shared so much great advice already, and I'm curious, what is like one of the best pieces of advice that someone's given you along the way, or maybe just something that you learned along the way?
One advice I've received is about to not be so caught up on being the expert, or like having a certain type of expertise in order to take up space on stage. You already have expertise. Your lived experience and your work experience is your own expertise. I think it took me a while though to really understand what that meant. Every time I heard it, I was just annoyed. So I think there might be advice you get along the way that feels like, okay, that's nice. I don't know how to make sense of it, but it may like click at some point. And I think I still struggle with like over researching first to feel this level of comfort, and then like honing back to like my own experience and making sure I'm sharing nuggets and knowledge from that. So again, like figure out what helps you have that right balance. Um, so that was an advice that was really helpful for me. Something I realized along the way is that um, imposter syndrome and inner critics, they don't actually go away. They just like morph over time. So whatever was the voice of my inner critic a year ago, the voice and the phrases that that inner critic is saying has evolved, but it's not gone. So I think I've given up on like trying to fight this inner critic or trying to fight this imposter syndrome versus thinking about like, how do I know what are my mental and physical signals that that inner critic is showing up right now, right? And inner critic for me would, one way it shows up is that it gets in the way of me over preparing. So if I'm saying over preparation is a way that I feel more confident, feel more prepared, then my inner critic may shed doubt on myself to the point where it tries to get in the way of my preparation, right? So it's not about like me trying to get rid of those things from my life. It's more or less like knowing how to be aware of them and pick up on signals when they're showing up so that I could coexist and still do the thing that I need to do, while knowing like that's real for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, the inner critic is so real. And that's such an interesting perspective, how it's like, this isn't necessarily going to go away, but it's going to evolve, and I'll have different ways to handle it and address it and be like, I see you. I know what you're doing.
Right.
Um, awesome. Tuli has a question that they just put in the chat about, I typically have my topics down prior to wanting to share, but I struggle with executing my words and not getting nervous. Any tips for right before going on stage? I know you said the power pose maybe doesn't work for you, but what do you do as your routine right before you start speaking? Thanks for that question.
So my preparation before going on stage is leaning. First, in the beginning, I'll lean heavily on my script. Back when we used to do on-stage talks, I would project my talk to a bigger screen, whether that's like my TV in my home, or if I'm at a hotel, I travel with a HDMI cable so that I can project my deck into to the TV in the hotel room. I keep my clicker so that I'm practicing speaking out loud and projecting in the way that feels comfortable, and making sure that I'm using the clicker and kind of just having a full body rehearsal. And I do that many times. That's been super helpful for me. And then in terms of right before going on stage, if I'm doing all that preparation where I'm rehearsing uh, out loud, walking and moving, what ends up happening then is like going right before on stage, I'm just like a panicked mess, right? Like I'm gonna be sweating profusely, maybe not. I'll like think about ways, uh, think about the things that I need. So I might need water around. I like to have pockets where I can put my clicker, or like, I don't know, like chapsticks, things that give you comfort. Like find ways to make sure you're still like creating that space for you. And then uh, what else? Oh, um, I also know that I'll be nervous, right? So I'm not trying to like lose my energy and trying to like calm myself down only. It's just a level of, similar to the inner critic concept. Like I know it's going to be there, so it's a matter of like, how do I kind of coexist with my nervousness, but in a way where the nervousness doesn't overpower me. um, I like to, the morning of, wake up really early, kind of do my calls or whatever I need to do, and then like practice, and then check out a little bit. And then I don't know if you guys have a playlist. Sometimes I listen to a good old Beyonce or Rihanna song to just get amped up. Um, and, and that's it. I mean, those are some of the things I do. But I think the biggest part is none of those other things will help me if I don't feel like I know my words, I know my points. I may not execute word for word on the script, but having the script or having the script and then having to go through rounds of practicing gives me a level of comfort with my own points to the point where like I'm ad-libbing and I'm leaning into my words in the way that makes in a way that feels natural.
It's
Is
great.
that helpful? Okay, cool.
Awesome. Thanks. Another question that I have, Ariba, and if anyone else has one, now's your chance, put it in the chat because we're going to transition into breakout rooms in just a bit. But something I'd love to hear about, we were talking about how speaking can lead to different opportunities and, maybe that shows up as more speaking, maybe that shows up as other things in your work. And I'd love if you can share what, speaking has led to for you and kind of what you're doing with that now.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. I think I wasn't expecting this out of speaking, and I think it's only in hindsight I can trace it back to speaking. So think about all the work that goes into an entire speaking experience, right? You are putting yourself out there by creating an abstract, creating an application, and then applying. And well, before that, maybe even getting feedback. So all of that are actions you're taking to invest in yourself. And even when you show up on stage and you're you're seeing that like outside of the place that you work, there are people who care about what you have to say. There are people who are taking notes. There were moments where I was like, why is anyone taking notes right now? I'm not saying anything that's new. And that ended up helping me find a voice in myself and having the capacity to articulate myself clearer at work. And I've noticed that I am advocating more for my BIPOC colleagues in a way that translates to actions within the organization. Um, I'm I went from being someone who's a lot more nervous about speaking in front of specific individuals that may have more hierarchical power at the organization to now I'm actually synthesizing in those rooms and thinking about like, what am I hearing right now? And repeating it back and making sure we have, like, it's more of a dynamic conversation. And now I'm leading more strategic work at the organization. But I don't think any of those could, like, even what, so the projects that I just mentioned in terms of leading strategic work, there were moments where I had an idea and then I went and then pitched it. And I presented to the CEO. I don't think I would have made those types of bets on myself had it not been that I was already making bets on myself by going through the speaker journey, right? So I think that's a different muscle that ends up building that I don't think I thought would have happened as a byproduct. And it's really great. It's been a great gift for me. And hopefully the work that I'm doing at my organization is also being impactful to my colleagues.
That's fantastic. I love that, like you said, you didn't necessarily see it coming at first, but upon reflection, the benefits that this has been able to give you. And I really hope that provides some extra inspiration to folks who are maybe like, I'm not sure if, I want to speak or I'm ready to. I think that you've been able to share so much on your journey of how you've thoughtfully approached this, how you've continued to evolve, and, some of the benefits that you're getting out of it. So super grateful for you sharing your story, Ariba. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think with the benefits of speaking, the other thing is that none of us really have the right answers for everything, right? We're just doing our best and we're making informed guesses here and there. And just like your talk is iterative, your work style is iterative. The your workflows are iterative. From one project to another, you're going to evolve and build expertise. But I think what speaking did for me was that it gave me confidence that I'll like keep learning. So then even now, if I'm pitching a strategic project, I know that when I first pitch it, I don't know if it's right, but I don't care as much. What I know is that by me putting it out there, other people will get to respond to it and will get to co-design what the next evolution of that looks like. And I think I just didn't have the confidence to even put my ideas out there to begin with before, versus now it's more like, I still know that I'm probably wrong about this, but at least I have more comfort in sharing it and communicating it and articulating it.
Awesome. That's great. And I am going to leave it at that because that was such a great way to kind of wrap up what we were talking about. So I want to say thank you so much, Ariba. I'm going to give you a round of applause from here. I know folks have
Thanks
made
so
it.
much for having me.
And I do, as I shared, want to encourage you all to stick around. I do think having the opportunity to meet other folks that are here and talk about what you learned is really valuable if you can. So what we're going to do next, before we kind of all come back together and say goodbye for the morning or afternoon, wherever you are, is put you in breakout rooms. So I have some questions to get you started in conversation about, where you are on your speaking journey, if there is a place that you're looking for support or can offer guidance, if there is anything that resonated today. And I'm going to have us break out for about 12 minutes or so, encourage you to have that conversation, and then we'll bring it back together for a quick wrap up. As I said, I think these have been a really good way to then think about, okay, what did I hear? How can I process this? How can I meet other folks in the community? But again, I just want to say a big thank you to Ariba for sharing her story and her advice that she's learned along the way. And this really is an iterative process. And I think just making that decision to get started can go a long way. So I'm going to set these up, this breakout room up. You will get a kind of quick invitation that will say, do you want to join this breakout room? If you press accept, it'll send you over to another room. It'll look like Zoom is shutting down, but it's not. And you'll get a message from me when there's 2 minutes left. And then the last minute, it'll say 60 seconds and start to count down, and then we'll all come back together to say a quick goodbye. So I opened that breakout room just now. Feel free to head on over, and I will see you all in a bit. If you didn't see the invite and want to join, please let me know. And if you are hanging around because you have a one-on-one question for Ariba, you can do that too. She's going to hang out in here. Now, Avi, you said you have to go. Peter, are you waiting to talk to Ariba, or do you have to go, or do you want to go into a breakout room?
I was going to drop off, but I was just going to say it's lovely to see you both. It's been a long time.
So great
It's
seeing
good to see you too. Yeah, really good to see you.
Ariba, congratulations.
Thank you. So great seeing you.
Yeah, Peter, what's in store for Global Diversity CFP Day this upcoming year?
But take care, and I'll hopefully.
Okay, we'll follow up later. Bye, Peter.
That's a good question, and
I think it's delayed.
There's ideas, but
let's talk more about it soon. I'll reach out to you to see how we can support. Okay, I think there was a delay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop this live streaming right here. Oh, oops, hold on.